My name is Margaret Whitmore, and the day I walked into that courtroom, I realized the man I once called my husband had destroyed everything we built together. He had traded decades of loyalty and respect for the fleeting embrace of a mistress who, in the end, left him with nothing but shame. I stood there in the gallery, not as his wife anymore, but as the woman who survived him, watching the whole town see him for who he truly was, a hollow man who had thrown away the very foundation of his life. It's a peculiar thing to watch someone you once loved become a stranger in front of your eyes. Daniel had been the center of my world for more than 30 years. I was the steady partner, the one who kept the house warm, raised our 2 children, hosted Sunday dinners, and made sure the Whitmore name shined in the community. Together, we built a life that neighbors admired. We had the brick colonial on Elm Street, with the manicured lawn that won the local garden club ribbon 3 summers in a row. On Christmas Eve, people drove by just to see our lights twinkle. Back then, I thought we had everything that mattered. Daniel owned auto dealerships across the county, and folks knew him as a man of vision. He wore sharp suits, had a firm handshake, and walked with the confidence of someone admired. In church on Sundays, we sat near the front pew, and I could feel the respect radiating toward us. People asked Daniel to chair committees, to sponsor local scholarships, to lead community drives. And I stood at his side, proud, though often unseen. That is the silent truth of many wives of powerful men. We are the backbone, but rarely acknowledged. I was fine with that for years because I believed we were a team. While he worked late at the dealership, I kept the house running. I packed lunches, paid bills, listened to our children's heartbreaks. I gave up teaching full-time so I could be available whenever the family needed me. Daniel would come home late sometimes, too tired to talk, but I convinced myself this was the price of success. He loved the applause, though. That was the first change I noticed. The Daniel I married was humble, a young man who built his first dealership with his own hands, scrubbing floors and polishing cars himself. But as the years rolled on, humility faded. He started giving donations with a flourish, like tossing coins to peasants expecting gratitude. He liked being admired more than he liked being loved. I remember one summer when our daughter Emily begged him to come watch her high school choir concert. He promised he would, but that night he was at a country club dinner chasing another business lead. Emily sang her heart out, and when she glanced at the empty seat beside me, I felt a crack form deep inside. I told myself he'd make it up to her. He never did. Those moments stacked up like unpaid bills, quiet but heavy. Still, I carried on. That's what wives of his generation did. We made do, we covered, we smiled when our hearts ached. But I saw the arrogance growing. I saw how he preened when people praised him. And I saw how he began to look past me, as if I had become part of the furniture of his success, rather than the woman who had helped build it. The last perfect memory I hold was one Thanksgiving evening. I had worked for days preparing the meal roast turkey, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole pies lined up like soldiers on the counter. Friends and family filled the house. Laughter bounced off the walls, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe we were still whole. Daniel carved the turkey, raised his glass, and the room applauded him like he was a king. But when I looked at his eyes, they weren't on me. They were distant already, reaching for something or someone else. Not long after the whisper started, a woman. Younger, bold, draped in perfume and promises. At first, I dismissed the gossip. Surely not Daniel, not after all these years. But deep down, I felt it. The late nights became later. The phone calls ended abruptly when I entered the room. He bought clothes I had never seen before, colognes that weren't for me. My gut twisted with the truth before my mind dared to admit it. That was the beginning of the unraveling. But in that courtroom years later, as I watched him stripped of wealth, respect, and dignity, I realized something even more powerful. His betrayal was not just against me or our children. It was against himself, against the very values that had once made him strong. Standing there, I didn't need to speak. His shame spoke loud enough. He thought he had only lost me, but the truth was he had lost everything. And that is where my story truly begins. After that day in the courtroom, I couldn't help but think back to how it all started, how we went from the golden years to the rubble of our marriage. To understand the ruin, you have to understand the rise. When Daniel and I first married, we were far from wealthy. We lived in a modest ranch-style home in a small Ohio town, the kind with tree-lined streets where kids rode bikes until dusk and neighbors borrowed cups of sugar from one another. Our first kitchen table was a hand-me-down from my mother, its paint chipped at the corners, but we were proud of it. Every morning, I packed his lunch in a brown paper bag, ham sandwiches, an apple, maybe a cookie if I had baked the night before, and he headed off to the dealership he was trying to build from the ground up. He worked long hours scrubbing cars himself, talking customers into financing deals, shaking hands until his knuckles cracked. And I was right there, balancing a job as a part-time teacher while managing the household. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that felt like everything. I still remember the nights when we counted pennies to see if we could afford both the gas bill and the new pair of shoes for our son Michael. We always found a way. In those early years, Daniel was humble, grateful. He'd come home exhausted, but he'd sit on the couch with the kids crawling on his lap, listening to Emily's stories from school, asking Michael about his baseball game. He would look at me and say, "We're going to make it, Margaret. You'll see." And I believed him because he had that spark ambition paired with sincerity. Slowly but surely, the dealership grew. One location became 2, then 3. Our income rose, and with it, our lifestyle. We moved into the Colonial on Elm Street, with its stately brick facade and spacious backyard. The neighbors admired us. Daniel was invited onto committees and boards. We hosted summer barbecues that were the talk of the block. It felt like we had arrived, like the years of scrimping and saving were finally paying off. I threw myself into making our house a home that radiated warmth. I decorated for every holiday, cooked big Sunday dinners, and kept family traditions alive. My world revolved around nurturing our children and supporting Daniel's ambitions. I believed my role, though often invisible, was vital. But success began to change him. At first it was subtle, the way he lingered in front of mirrors adjusting his tie just so, or the way he boasted a little louder at gatherings about his newest dealership. He started measuring his worth by applause, by nods of approval from businessmen and neighbors. At church, he no longer bowed his head in quiet prayer. He looked around to see who was watching him drop a check into the offering plate. I remember one 4th of July parade when he sponsored the town's marching band uniforms. His name was plastered on the banner Whitmore Auto Group. People clapped and he grinned like a man who had just won a crown. I clapped too, but something inside me ached. He seemed more in love with the spotlight than with the family cheering him on. At home, the shift grew clearer. The late nights at the office multiplied. Family dinners became rarer. Emily would ask if Dad was coming home, and I'd paste on a smile and say, "He's working hard for us." But I could see the disappointment in her eyes. Michael grew quiet, keeping his distance from a father who was becoming more like a guest than a parent. I tried to talk to Daniel to remind him of what mattered. One evening after another missed dinner, I said, "You're chasing everything out there, but you're losing what's in here." He brushed me off, saying I didn't understand the pressures of business. "I'm building a future for us," he insisted. "But a future without presence is just an empty shell." Despite the cracks, there were still moments of grace. Vacations to Florida. Christmas mornings with laughter echoing through the halls, anniversary dinners, where for a few hours he seemed like the man I had married. Those moments kept me holding on, believing the old Daniel was still there beneath the polished exterior. But in hindsight, I can see how the pride was eroding him. Every accolade, every deal closed, every handshake added bricks to a pedestal he thought he deserved. And the higher he climbed, the farther he drifted from the foundation we had built together. By the time he turned 50, Daniel was a man adored in public, but distant in private. I still played my part, smiling at community events, cooking for guests, hosting holiday parties. People saw us as the picture-perfect couple. They didn't see the nights I sat alone at the dinner table, food cold, waiting for him to walk through the door. They didn't hear the hollow silence when the children stopped asking about their father's schedule. That was the golden life, the era before the betrayal. We had wealth, respect, the admiration of an entire town. But beneath the glitter, the cracks were spreading. And soon enough, the weight of temptation would split it all wide open. It started with whispers. Small-town whispers that travel faster than the wind, carried from the grocery store checkout line to the church pews. I'd overhear women lowering their voices, saying Daniel's name in the same breath as another woman's. At first, I dismissed it. After all, people envy success. They love to drag down those who stand tall. I told myself it was just idle talk, the kind that fades as quickly as it rises. But deep down, I felt the shift. A wife knows. It was in the way Daniel's phone seemed to buzz more often, the way he'd tilt the screen away from me. It was in the cologne that lingered on him, expensive, and new one I hadn't bought. It was in the late nights that turned into all-nighters, his excuses rehearsed, yet hollow. He said he was expanding the business, chasing deals, working on investments. But his eyes, once steady, now darted like a man hiding something. The first undeniable sign came one Saturday afternoon. He said he was going to a dealership conference in Cincinnati. I believed him, or maybe I wanted to believe him. Hours later, I ran into a friend at the farmer's market who casually asked how Daniel was enjoying his weekend off. My stomach dropped. I smiled, nodded, and kept walking, but my hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped my basket of peaches. For weeks, I lived in a haze of suspicion. Every time the phone rang, my heart raced. Every time he left the house, I felt like he was leaving me behind for someone else. I searched for proof, but found nothing concrete. Then one night, the proof found me. Daniel came home late, reeking of perfume that didn't belong to me. The smell clung to his shirt like a confession. I confronted him in the kitchen, my voice shaking. "Who is she?" I asked. He laughed a cold, dismissive laugh and said, "Don't be ridiculous, Margaret." But his eyes betrayed him. That was the night I knew for certain. Not long after the mask came off, he stopped pretending. He began spending weekends away, not even bothering with excuses. He rolled up in flashy suits, wearing watches I had never seen, driving cars, he said, were for the business. He looked younger somehow, not because of health, but because he was feeding off a new kind of attention. The town began to notice, too. I heard it in the careful pauses when people spoke to me, the pity in their eyes. The final blow came one evening when I saw them together. I was leaving the grocery store bags in my arms when Daniel pulled up in a sleek convertible. She was sitting beside him, laughing, her hand resting on his arm, like she owned him. She couldn't have been more than 30, with long hair, sharp nails, and the confidence of someone who thought she'd won a prize. My prize. My husband. He saw me. Our eyes met. For a second, guilt flickered across his face, then vanished, replaced by arrogance. He didn't flinch, didn't move his arm away. He just drove off, leaving me standing there in the parking lot, with tears burning my eyes. That was the night humiliation wrapped itself around me like a shroud. At home, I faced the silence. I set down the groceries, cooked dinner for one, and sat at the table staring at the empty chair across from me. The children were grown by then, both away at college, so there was no one to shield me from the loneliness. I felt abandoned, not just as a wife, but as a woman. I had given him my youth, my loyalty, my years of quiet sacrifice, and he had traded it for a mistress with painted lips and shallow promises. Yet even in my despair, I began to harden. Something inside me shifted. I stopped waiting up for him. I stopped cooking his favorite meals. I stopped pretending. I carried myself through town with my head held high, even as whispers circled me. If he wanted to throw away decades for temptation, I would not be the one to hide in shame. The shame was his to carry. Still, the pain was sharp. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake listening for the sound of his car, wondering if he was with her. I prayed not for his return, but for strength. I asked God to steady me, to remind me of my worth beyond being Daniel's wife. Slowly, I began to realize that his betrayal said more about him than it did about me. But betrayal has a way of seeping into every crack of a marriage. By the time Christmas rolled around, he didn't bother showing up. The tree stood in the living room, lights twinkling, gifts stacked beneath. But Daniel was gone. He called once, said he was busy with business partners. I heard her laughter in the background. That was when the last thread snapped. I was no longer his wife in anything but name. The mistress had taken my place, and Daniel, blinded by vanity, let her. He had stepped out of the golden life we had built and into a world of deceit, not realizing that every step away from me was a step toward his own destruction. And though I hadn't yet seen how far he would fall, I knew in my bones that no good could come from betrayal. Sooner or later, the bill would come due, and when it did, it would cost him everything. The life Daniel built with his mistress was like a firework, loud, dazzling, and destined to burn out far too quickly. From the outside, it looked glamorous. They paraded through town in expensive cars, dripping with new clothes and jewelry. He bought her whatever she wanted: designer handbags, spa weekends, even a condo downtown, so she could have her own space. He threw money at her as though it grew on trees, forgetting how many nights we once counted pennies just to keep the lights on. I heard about their trips from neighbors who couldn't resist gossip. They went to Chicago for theater shows, jetted to Florida for sun-drenched weekends, dined at restaurants where a single meal cost more than a week's groceries. And all the while, I stayed in the house we had once shared, walking past the empty chair at the table, the fading photographs on the mantel. But as the months wore on, cracks began to show. Daniel's businesses suffered because his focus was no longer on the dealerships. Deals fell through, customers complained, and his longtime manager resigned after decades of loyalty. The man who once prided himself on shaking every customer's hand was now too busy sipping martinis at rooftop bars with his mistress to notice his empire slipping away. I still went to church every Sunday, though it wasn't easy. The whispers followed me into the pews, and the sympathetic glances stung worse than daggers. People didn't need to say a word, I could feel the pity radiating from them. At the grocery store, women avoided eye contact, unsure whether to comfort me or distance themselves from the scandal. I held my head high, even when humiliation pressed down on my shoulders. Daniel didn't care. If anything, he flaunted it. He brought her to community events where I used to stand by his side. The audacity was breathtaking. He seemed to thrive on shocking people, on testing how much disrespect he could show me without consequence. But arrogance has a way of blinding a man to the cliffs around him. One evening, Emily called from college, her voice tight with anger. "Mom, I saw pictures online. Dad's at some gala with her. Why is he doing this?" I wanted to shield her to soften the truth, but I couldn't lie anymore. "Because he's lost his way," I said quietly. "But remember, his choices are not yours to carry." Still, I could hear her sobbing through the phone, and it broke me. Michael, always the quieter one, reacted differently. He withdrew, refusing to talk about his father at all. When Daniel tried calling, Michael ignored the calls. He told me I don't have a dad anymore. Those words cut deeper than any betrayal, because they were true in a way none of us wanted to admit. Meanwhile, the mistress revealed her true colors. What had begun as excitement soon turned into tension. She grew demanding, jealous of his time, suspicious of every move he made. Their arguments spilled into public places, restaurants, hotel lobbies, even the dealership office. He shouted, she screamed, and people watched the spectacle like a car crash they couldn't look away from. By then, his finances were unraveling. He borrowed heavily to keep up appearances, mortgaged properties, and dipped into retirement accounts. But it was never enough. She wanted more gifts, more trips, more proof of devotion, and he, desperate to keep her, gave until there was nothing left. I watched from the sidelines, a strange mix of sorrow and grim satisfaction. I hadn't lifted a finger to ruin him. I didn't need to. He was doing it all himself. Betrayal is like a rot. Once it starts, it spreads until the whole structure collapses. The night she left him came sooner than he ever expected. I heard about it from a former friend of his who couldn't resist telling me. She had packed her designer bags, drained the joint account he had opened for her, and vanished. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. One day she was clinging to his arm. The next she was a ghost. Daniel came crawling back to the empty house, but it wasn't ours anymore. By then, I had already filed for divorce. The papers were signed, the ring long tucked away in a drawer. He stood in the doorway, disheveled. His once proud suit wrinkled his eyes. Hollow. "She left me, Margaret," he whispered, as if I might comfort him. But I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no joy, just emptiness, because I had already mourned the man he used to be. From that moment on, the fall was swift. The businesses folded, the bank repossessed the cars, creditors circled like vultures. The man who had strutted through life now shuffled, hunched, and defeated. And the town that once praised him now gossiped about him, their admiration replaced by scorn. The mistress had taken his pride, but it was Daniel himself who had destroyed his soul. When the final collapse came, it was brutal. The house on Elm Street, the one I had once filled with holiday dinners and children's laughter, was seized by the bank. The manicured lawn grew wild, the shutters faded, and soon, strangers lived where my family's memories had been etched into every corner. I drove past once just to see, and I wept, not for him, but for the home we had lost to his foolishness. Daniel's dealerships closed one by one. Where there had once been bright banners and balloons announcing weekend sales, there were empty lots, weeds sprouting through cracked pavement. Former employees whispered about bounced paychecks and lawsuits. His name, once a mark of trust, became a joke. "Don't buy from Whitmore," people said, "you'll regret it." And Daniel himself. He shrank before my eyes. The man who once strode through town in tailored suits now wore rumpled clothes. His shoulders stooped, his eyes darting nervously as if expecting another creditor to appear around the corner. He lost weight, not from discipline, but from stress, from nights spent chasing what was already gone. I remember the first time I saw him alone at Miller's Diner. It was a place we used to take the kids after Friday night football games, where the waitress knew our names and always added an extra slice of pie to Emily's plate. There he was, sitting in the back booth, hunched over a plate of meatloaf, eating slowly, as if even chewing took effort. Nobody approached him. The man who once commanded a room now sat invisible. I walked past without a word, though my heart twisted. Revenge didn't need to be spoken. It was etched into his every movement. The children reacted in their own ways. Emily, now working her first job out of college, told me she felt torn. "He's my dad, Mom, but I can't forgive him for what he did to you." Michael, harder in his anger, refused to see him at all. "He made his choices," he said. "He doesn't get to play the victim now." As much as I wanted to ease their pain, I couldn't erase the truth Daniel had betrayed not just me, but his own children. The gossip in town was relentless. At church, I caught snippets. "He lost everything you know. The mistress left him flat." Can you imagine? I wanted to cover my ears, but at the same time, I knew he had invited this humiliation. Pride had been his crown, and now shame was his cloak. And yet, in the quiet of my own home, I wrestled with conflicting emotions. Part of me felt vindicated watching the man who discarded me unravel so completely. Another part of me felt sorrow for what he had become. After 3 decades together, it was impossible to feel nothing. Even anger requires a spark of love, and I had burned through mine long ago. What remained was a heavy silence. His health began to falter. Stress carved lines into his face, his hair grayed prematurely, and I heard rumors of drinking. Once Emily confessed, she had seen him stumbling out of a bar downtown, looking lost. That image haunted me, though I wasn't there to witness it. I imagined the strong man I once knew, reduced to that fragile figure, and I wondered if betrayal consumes the betrayer more than the betrayed. The legal proceedings only added to his misery. Creditors stripped away what little remained, lawyers picked apart his accounts, and even the retirement funds he once boasted about vanished. When the divorce was finalized, the judge awarded me the modest assets left untouched. I didn't celebrate. It felt more like salvaging scraps from a house fire. Still, I stood taller than I had in years. The community, once pitying, began to respect me quietly. Women pulled me aside, whispered, "You're stronger than I would have been." Men nodded in acknowledgement, their eyes soft with something like regret for the way they had once praised Daniel. I realized my dignity had survived where his had not. One evening, he appeared at my doorstep. He looked older, thinner, his suit hanging off him like a borrowed costume. "Margaret," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't know where else to go." For a moment, I saw the young man I'd married, the dreamer, who once promised me the world. But then, I remembered the mistress's laughter in the background of his calls, the empty chair at Christmas, the tears of our children. "I'm sorry, Daniel," I said, steady but firm. "That door closed a long time ago." I didn't slam the door. I simply closed it softly, finally. After that, I rarely saw him except in passing. At the diner, on the sidewalk. A shadow of the man he once was. And every time I was reminded, betrayal carries a price. Not always in the moment, but eventually, and with interest. In the months that followed, I began piecing together a new life for myself. For so long, my identity had been tethered to Daniel's, his wife, his partner, his hostess at community events. Without him, I felt like a tree stripped bare in winter. But slowly, buds of resilience began to appear. I took a part-time position at the library, a place I had always loved. Surrounded by shelves of stories, I found comfort in the quiet rhythm of checking out books, recommending novels, chatting with neighbors who valued me for who I was, not for whose wife I had been. The paycheck was modest, but it gave me independence. It reminded me that I could stand on my own 2 feet. Neighbors stopped by not with pity anymore, but with genuine warmth. They invited me for coffee, asked me to join quilting circles and book clubs. I discovered friendships that had been waiting in the wings while I was too busy holding together a crumbling marriage. For the first time in decades, I laughed without forcing it. One autumn afternoon, as I was walking home with a bag of groceries, I saw Daniel. He was standing outside the hardware store. His shoulders hunched, a paper bag in his hand. He looked so different from the man I had once known, shrunken, worn down, a ghost wearing human clothes. He caught my eye, hesitated, then nodded. I nodded back. No words passed between us, but in that moment, I understood he was no longer my burden. Our children had mixed feelings when it came to him. Emily visited once out of obligation more than desire. She told me afterward, he's not Dad anymore. He's just someone I used to know. Michael stayed firm in his refusal. His anger was a wall Daniel could not climb, and perhaps that was fair. A father's betrayal cuts deeper than a husband's because children never ask for it. But life has a way of softening edges with time. The longer I lived without Daniel's shadow, the clearer my own reflection became. I was no longer just Mrs. Whitmore. I was Margaret, a woman with her own voice, her own dignity, her own future. Yet, I will admit, there were nights when loneliness sat across from me at the dinner table. Nights when I missed the comfort of routine, even if the routine had been fractured. I missed the sound of a man's footsteps in the hall, even if they often carried lies. Healing is never clean. It comes with jagged edges and unexpected aches. Still, I found strength in faith and family and in small acts of kindness. Volunteering at the church food pantry reminded me that there were others carrying heavier burdens. And unlike Daniel, I had not lost myself to arrogance or betrayal. I still had something to give. One winter evening, snow falling softly outside my window, Daniel appeared again. This time, he wasn't in a suit, but in a worn jacket, his hair unkempt, his hands rough. He asked if we could talk. Against my better judgment, I invited him in. We sat at the same kitchen table where we had once shared countless meals. His eyes were tired, and for the first time in years, humble. He spoke quietly, admitting he had lost everything. The businesses, the house, the respect gone, the mistress gone. He said he was working odd jobs now, anything to keep afloat. I thought I was invincible, he confessed. But I see now I was a fool. I listened not with anger, but with clarity. Daniel, I said I don't wish you harm. But you made choices, and those choices had consequences. You lost what mattered most, not because of me, but because of you. He lowered his head, and in that silence I knew justice had already been served. Not by courts or revenge, but by life itself. His downfall was his punishment, and my survival was my reward. In the weeks that followed, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Not because Daniel had apologized, his words couldn't undo the years of betrayal, but because I no longer carried the weight of his sins. I had stepped out from under his shadow, and in the light I found myself again. True wealth, I realized, was not in houses or cars or accolades. It was in loyalty and family, in the quiet dignity of living with integrity. Daniel had thrown it all away, but I still had it. And for that, I was grateful. Betrayal leaves a scar, but it also leaves a lesson. When I look back on everything, on the courtroom where his ruin was exposed, on the house that slipped from our grasp, on the whispers that once followed me through town, I see not just pain, but truth. He had it all, and he squandered it for vanity, for desire for a woman who cared only for what he could provide. And when the money dried up, so did she. Daniel's story is one of warning, but mine is one of survival. I chose not to let his betrayal define me. Instead, I rebuilt myself from the ashes he left behind. My dignity remained intact. My children stood by me, and I learned that the foundation of a life is not wealth or applause. It is character. I often wonder if he ever truly understood what he lost. Not the house, not the dealerships, not the country club dinners. Those things are replaceable. What he lost was respect. Respect from his children, from his community, from himself. Once that is gone, no amount of money can buy it back. There are moments when I think of the man he used to be, the young husband who held my hand at county fairs, who whispered promises under starlit skies, who dreamed of giving our children a better life. That man died long before Daniel ever set foot in a courtroom. Pride killed him. Arrogance buried him. The mistress was just the final nail in the coffin. Still, I am not without compassion. I don't wish him endless misery. I hope he finds some measure of peace in the simple life he has now. I hope he understands that betrayal is not just an act against another person, but an act against oneself. And perhaps, in his solitude, he has come to terms with that truth. As for me, I found a new rhythm. My days are quieter, but they are filled with genuine joy. I spend time with Emily and Michael, who have grown into strong, resilient adults. We share meals, laughter, and memories that are ours alone, untouched by his betrayal. I see in them the legacy I choose to claim, not his downfall, but our endurance. To those listening, especially those who have carried the sting of betrayal, I say, this: you are stronger than the hurt inflicted upon you. You cannot control the choices of others, but you can control your response. Do not let someone else's weakness define your worth. Stand tall even when the world tries to bend you. Treasure loyalty. Guard the trust you are given. Respect the ones who stand beside you when life is hard. Because in the end, it is not wealth or desire or fleeting admiration that sustains us. It is love, integrity, and faithfulness. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: betrayal carries a price no one can afford. My husband paid with his fortune, his reputation, and his family. But I, by holding on to dignity and truth, gained something far greater. I gained freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if it reminded you of your own journey, or opened your eyes to what truly matters, I invite you to share it. Tell your friends, leave your thoughts, or simply carry the lesson with you. And if you wish to hear more stories like mine, stories of betrayal, justice, and the resilience of the human spirit, I welcome you to stay with me here. Because sometimes the deepest revenge is not in what we do to others, but in how we rise after they have tried to break us. The end